So for a while, I've been working on a concept for an animated web series called Shuttered. It's about a town ridden by a strange plague that causes people to develop surreal mutations. And in each episode, David, which operates as sort of a plague clerk, receives a different assignment, sending him to try and help one of those who are sick. After coming up with the general idea for the series, I started brainstorming different stories, situations, and characters that could be a part of it. One of those ideas came from a random sketch I did of a guy who had all these eyes growing from his back. I really liked that sketch and I could imagine how it would fit perfectly in the larger concept. To start off, I tried thumbnailing how I pictured this story would play out visually. I then scanned these thumbnails and took them into Storyboarder, which is a free storyboarding app. In some cases I improved on the basic sketches, and in other I just added more frames in between to get a complete sense of the story. I then took these sketches into Premiere Pro, recorded some basic voices, and even added a bit of music and sound effects to basically try with the lowest possible effort to get something as close as possible to watching the actual episode. When I watched it play though, something seemed off. The characters didn't really have a will of their own. They seemed to kind of act the moments that I envisioned, but they didn't get to these moments organically. If I wanted this to work, the moments that appear on screen had to be justified and would have to result solely by the characters acting out their own personal will. If there's something that I want to happen on screen but it doesn't make sense for a character to act in that certain way, I would have to figure out another way to get to that scene or would let go of that idea. To fix that lack of authenticity, I thought I should try and write a second draft in prose, kind of like writing it as a short story where I could get into the heads of the characters, writing down their thoughts and feelings in real time, at least as an exercise into really getting into their head at any given moment. This experiment proved to be very beneficial. First of all, I didn't know how satisfying and creatively freeing it would be to write in a prose format. As an illustrator, I always enjoyed that power of creating something imaginary and putting it on paper. Prose writing allowed me, in a sense, to do it at even a greater extent, since it allowed me to describe not only what is physical, but also now I could describe feelings, thoughts, personalities, and dynamics. Abstract things that you can only hint at with drawing, but not describe as clearly as you can in writing. It was also really fun getting into my character's head and discover how much personality you can pick up on when trying to write a character's thoughts and feelings. The differences in plot between my initial thumbnail draft and the current prose draft were not huge, but those small differences were meaningful. For example, in both drafts, David has to walk in the middle of the night to his patient's house. When I drew those thumbnails, David's walk towards his patient is tense and almost scary. I drew it as if he's really scared by these strange men he sees standing in the street, confiding and conspiring. However, in the prose draft, as he's walking the street, I got a completely different vibe of his mental state. In the prose draft, I wrote something along the lines of, David was struggling to keep his eyes open. All he thought about as he walked towards his patient was to get back to bed and go back to sleep. So David isn't scared doing that walk, he's simply tired and lacks any strong emotion towards his next assignment. This really revealed how little he thinks of his job and how little sense of importance it gives him. It helped shed a light on this character arc David would go through of developing actual care towards his patients, and it helped articulate this general theme of trying to help others. Without the prose draft, it would have been much harder to notice these. Writing a prose draft gave me a lot of useful insight into the story, but still I found myself stuck afterwards at another writer's block, feeling that the story isn't there yet, but without knowing what to do to solve it. The problem with the prose draft was that it made it very easy to get lost in all the details and harder to get a sense of the bigger picture. I left that episode idea aside and developed other episode concepts in a similar way, starting with thumbnails, then switching to prose, just trying to develop the world of the series a bit further. But as the idea grew, the looming question of how I am going to produce it started to weigh in on me. I thought that maybe I could make an animated teaser, something that I might use to pitch to a production company. I tried making a few animated frames, but quickly got discouraged by the amount it took me to create each frame. Even when it was just for a teaser, I couldn't make myself reach the finish line. I left the project aside for a while, and a few months later tried it again, this time using another technique, but again, at some point I just got discouraged by the amount of work it took. I guess that I just wasn't really used to the labor intensity of animation and had a hard time accepting how long it actually takes to do something in animation, especially if you're doing it on your own. As I was struggling both with the story and with the means of producing the actual show, I almost lost my hope on being able to make this project happen, almost thinking I might ditch the project entirely. Luckily, a eureka moment that came from an unexpected source helped me to solve these story problems, but I'll get to that in the next episode. Thanks for watching, and if you find this project interesting, of course, make sure to subscribe and follow. I will keep having these behind the scenes updates, and also at some point, hopefully before the end of 2025, I'll try to release that first episode.